If you run a public company, you cannot say AI is not an immediate threat. They want an AI story. In frontier technology, when things are exponentially moving, building is not the right idea. The second mover always wins.
Today, we have a very special guest named Georg, co-founder of C4AIL, the Center for AI Leadership.
Disruptive impact of this technology is that the subject matter expertise of people who are sitting on specialized jobs controlling that movement is being replaced with machines. That has dramatic societal implications, knowledge work implications, but it also means a lot more people get access to this. And if you lay off the people who know your company and your customers best, you're actually crippling your own company. Literally is 3 people away from being eaten alive by big tech who run the actual model. When you looked at it even a few years ago, you understood that AI is what gets funding. So you have to talk about AI. Now you need to be able to actually understand AI. You need to have the talent. So if you don't, it's game over.
Today, we have a very special guest named Georg. Thank you for joining us. Could you please help us out with how do you get to where you are and tell us a little bit about C4AIL?
Where am I? Well, I'm originally from Germany. I lived in Canada. I lived in the United States. I worked on video games, a little company called BioWare that got a bit out of control, became fairly big. Worked briefly in Singapore as well as a game developer at Ubisoft. And after that, spent 7 years as a business engineering director at Meta. I looked after engineering teams here in the region, was then affected by the layoffs like many others. And we're in 2025 and everyone is talking about AI. Been doing this for a few years now. When you looked at it even a few years ago, you understood that AI is what gets funding, right? So we made a startup first, building AI products, but in that process, it became clear to us that's not actually going to work.
Why is that?
Well, because we're dealing with frontier technology, right? We're dealing with technology that is rapidly improving month over month over month, and the technology improves about at the rate of 1 year in 1 month. When we go back into the 1980s or 90s, if you were buying a television every year, every 2 years, you could get something much better, right? CRT, then LCD, better resolutions, and so on. Now it's month over month.
Yeah.
So, and then the question becomes, would you buy a product if you know that you could get a twice as good product for half the price in the next month? Right. So there's a challenge there. If you're building products, there's a challenge convincing people to buy your product. At the same time, for many people, especially 2 years ago, it wasn't clear why they should be buying AI. Right. We need to remember that the conversation was, is this another one of Silicon Valley's games like Bitcoin, NFT, metaverse, or is this serious? So for the first year, many companies were like, this is not serious. This is another one of those bullshit things, right? That has changed quite dramatically. And we ended up moving more towards helping companies understand AI consulting. And from there, we started realizing that the more the impact of AI became clear on labor market, on job profiles, on governments, on questions like digital sovereignty, and so on, that there was a lot of need for leadership, right? And I define leadership really here as the critical thing, because this technology, and we can go through a bunch of examples there, it fundamentally changes the frame of reference on some things. Right. I think we can, if we look at what happened with artists, right? It took us a year to go from, but it can't draw hands to, oops. There's many other vectors where the same thing applies. And leadership versus management is the ability to, step outside of the box, take the box off the train tracks that the AI train is barreling down to, or a large tech company is barreling down, and fundamentally shift the frame of reference. Managers don't have that ability in companies. You need leaders, right? And we specifically started focusing on business leaders, people who are not technical, right? Like technology has, in my estimation, become a bit of a religion over the last 20, 30 years. And I certainly benefited from that in my career, right? But the moment a tech person starts throwing out tech jargon, it's Latin, and we all turn off, and we say we can't validate that. It might as well be true. right? The AGI or a whole bunch of buzzwords around AI are a good example there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be like that. So we specialize in communicating with leaders, for leaders in a language that business people can understand, that CEOs can understand, that non-technical people can understand, to help them prepare, help them make the right adjustments to avoid disruption. And we realized this was a pretty significant need. So we started actually incorporating the nonprofit Center for AI Leadership in addition to our consultancy.
Without leadership in this area, I mean, leaders actually paved the way, right? And we, especially in an industry or in new technology where by and large, a lot of us do not know what to do with it or don't know where to start as well. We often look to the leaders to tell us, how would you like us to implement this? But I'd like to find out from you, what do you think leaders are doing right or wrong in the adoption of AI?
Well, the challenge with it is twofold, right? Like, first, we have a habit now, 20 years, counting 30 years maybe, of deferring to technology leadership to technology leaders, right? So now you're talking to tech leaders.
Yes.
Right. And we have a habit of, over the last 10 years, right? And for many people, let's say if you're a millennial, that's your entire career, basically.
Yeah.
There has only been one way of dealing with technology. You adopt it.
Yes.
Right. So the first reaction to everyone has to a new technology that looks disruptive is, well, we adopt it and then we're going to be fine. Right, we've done this with cloud. Right, in cloud, cloud comes along, you look at it, you adopt it. Your customers don't necessarily even realize it's happening. It's a minor reconfiguration. Some people in your company will be affected. They have to retrain, learn AWS or Azure and so on. But fundamentally, it's something that you can adopt, and that's a process that can be managed. Right, and it's the same with mobile in a way.
Yeah.
We adopt mobile, we move our websites, our companies online, we make some apps, and it's actually just a shift of medium in many ways. So when you have that, it's fairly tempting that when something new comes along, that you adopt it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we had a history of 5 years about, I think, of Silicon Valley making up a lot of stuff. NFT, Web3, metaverse, blockchain.
Yes.
Right? Like 2017, 18, everything was put it on the blockchain. There was also machine learning, by the way.
Yes.
Then we had a run at that too, right? And so now you have people who, can only turn to their tech leaders, their CTOs, or, in the press listening to the combined tech leadership, right? Microsoft, Elon, all those guys. And you have... the question is this technology real or is it another round of bullshit? Right? And I think what went wrong is everyone is dependent now on the tech leaders and what they're saying. And it's very self-serving, by the way. If you're in a company, you're running technology, you're the CTO, you're working in the tech department, asking you the question of should we adopt new technology comes usually with budgets, with prestige, with people, with whatever. So you're not actually getting necessarily a measured answer, right? And you have a history of 10, 15 years of where every problem could be solved by adopting it. The problem with AI is, and this is where things are going wrong, is you can't just adopt it. We can go into this in a bit more detail later, but just adopting AI will probably kill your company. There's a different quality here, a different challenge. And so leaders currently have to understand that the problem is a company-wide problem. It's not just talking to the tech department. I do consulting for gaming companies, video game companies, for example. I have a long history in that field, and AI touches every single job in a gaming company. Music is affected, like audio, translation, localization, art, 3D,
VO,
marketing, voiceover, everything is touched. And of course, software engineering. So if you go and you start basically saying, here, CTO, you're in charge, director of engineering, you're in charge, deal with this AI thing, your company will actually rip itself apart. Because very quickly, people will realize, wait a second, this is costing jobs in every department.
Yeah.
Everyone is losing headcount. Everyone, like technology is now forcing us to make all of these changes. So you end up being better with a governance structure that brings everyone together in the company, right? An executive committee or like an AI steering committee and so on to look at the problem holistically, because otherwise you end up with a company where tech fights everyone else.
What I understand is that big companies, isn't it in their favor to always be at the cutting edge? And I think that's also why they would want to adopt really quickly. And in Singapore, I know that we're always trying to like upgrade and retrain our staff so that we don't have to lose that headcount. But you say that this is actually going to be killing our companies?
Well, yeah, it's fairly simple, right? So when you adopt something, you pay a certain amount of money, right? Investment in people and training and rolling out whatever it is. And then you want a return of investment.
Yes.
Right? But what if your competitor adopts the same thing, but it's twice as good a month later? Right? Timing is actually everything. And I think especially now, this year, this has been apparent for a while, but this year with DeepSeek, it's very apparent is that the second mover always wins when it comes to frontier technology. There's very little history where the first mover can really win long term. You need to have the ability to establish a business moat, right? You need to have an advantage, an unfair advantage over your competition in order to really benefit from the technology that you are spending a lot of time to develop, right? In the past, that has happened. So Google was the first company that did deep learning, and that Google's entire premise was that the internet is going to grow forever. And if something grows forever, data grows forever, eventually we're going to be at a point where no one can manually curate this, right? And that was at a time, 98, when most of the internet was manually curated. It was directories, right? Like where you would go and you would go say services, plumber, Singapore, and so on.
Pages to update.
Correct, because that's what we usually do, right? The first thing we do tends to be we take what we have and we move it.
Upload it.
And we upload it. The phone was the same thing, right? The first iPhone had all the little notepads and tape recorder and all the things from your that you knew from your desktop in there too, right? And so we did that and it worked for a while, but Google understood that this is just going to grow forever, right? And if it grows forever, the only way to curate that and manage the volume is going to be artificial intelligence, deep learning. Over time, over the next 10 years, all the large tech companies that today exist discovered the same thing.
Yeah.
Facebook went from the chronological feed to the curated feed because the amount of content that comes in needed to be matched more beneficial, right? And the same with Amazon. So what moat did these companies have? They had access to deep learning research, people who had talent modes, right? The knowledge to do deep learning primarily. And that was a fairly substantial moat. It took many, many years for these kind of experts to be available outside. It was kind of the best hidden secret in Silicon Valley is that I think we took everyone's scientists right from university and we made sure they went nowhere else. So around 2012, 13, there were only deep learning in the large AI labs of tech companies, right? So back to the original question with that, what is the moat that, let's say, an OpenAI has? Right? And it turns out with DeepSeek, there is no moat. In fact, there was a very prescient paper written by a Google engineer about a year and a half ago, which said, we have no moat and neither has OpenAI, right? Because there's a new force that no one calculated with, which is open source.
Yes.
All right.
Correct.
Open source means that you are fundamentally competing with infinite number of people who no one pays. And in the long run, you can probably not compete on that, right? So we can ask ourselves, what would be the business modes that make these companies defensible, right? And we could say, well, maybe it's GPU, right? Maybe it's compute. That is what everyone was telling, right? You need a nuclear power station. You need massive investment. And that worked all very well until January this year when DeepSeek came along and basically presented math that shows that actually you can run this at much, much, much lower cost, right? And that means everyone else who previously thought, well, we shouldn't even be starting because this is going to be way too expensive, suddenly has a leg in. And we're seeing the effect over these months very, very clearly now, right? So there's no moat in a compute. We thought maybe data is a moat. If you have better data than everyone else, you have a better AI model. But DeepSeek also showed that you can just pay for the API and pull the data out of one model and put it into another model. And considering that it was taken from the internet in the first place, as long as the data is on the internet, everyone has access to it anyway. And eventually all models will have the same data. That is the idea. So there's no business moat there either, right? So that becomes challenging because how do you run a business? How do you make money, right? How can OpenAI charge aspirationally $20,000 per month for really, really advanced services when everyone is just a month behind and not spending nearly as much as them? My favorite example out of the last year is, the last 2 months, is Grok 3 was trained for $400 million. And it's about 2% better than DeepSeek, which was trained for $5 million. What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
Why would anyone pay you, 1.25%? That's what DeepSeek cost.
Yes.
That also means that DeepSeek would have to charge only 1.25% of the cost in order to run profitable compared to Grok, right?
Yeah.
So when you take that into account, you realize that when you're a first mover in this space, you have a problem. You're overpaying dramatically, and the same is true for all companies. Everyone who last year did RAG, for example, retrieval augmented generation, right? A year and a half ago, everyone started doing AI projects. And we can talk about why, but what matters is that the early ones were like, we need to do a chatbot. To do a chatbot, we need RAG, retrieval augmented generation. It's going to cost us $500,000, $1 million. And by the time they finish the project after 6 months, the technology has completely changed.
Yes.
Often you don't need RAG anymore. The way you did RAG was completely different. Everything you built was gone. So the rule is, in frontier technology, when things are exponentially moving,
Yes.
building is not the right idea necessarily.
And therefore, if you do upgrade your staff, your headcount, and you try to train them in advance, that training is going to be really, really outdated very soon, and you'll have to just try to keep up.
Let's talk about training. What do you train? Like 2 years ago? What would you train? Right? Because we had these requests, right? Can you train our people in prompt engineering?
That's right, because you're training the leadership and how you're going to be able to just keep up to AI and Gen AI.
And even back then, we told people there's no point in training your people in prompt engineering because prompt engineering is not going to be there for the long run. The fundamental under the transformer, which underlies generative AI, is very simple. It's data. You take a large amount of data, you pass it through a fairly simple piece of code, 1,000 lines of code to train a llama. It extracts the patterns, the rules of creation inside that original data, and then you get a mathematical function out, a model, weights, that are able to generate more data like that, like the initial data. So when you look at prompt engineering, you realize very quickly there's tons of patterns in that data, and these patterns will invariably be abstracted, and that is what happened, right? The models that you see today, primarily self-prompt and self-prompt optimized. There are tools that you can use to create prompts.
Yes.
And in fact, the value of the prompt itself is somewhat limited because the technology also is like a slot machine. The same prompt gives you different answers. So just knowing how to prompt, and then there's a million models, right? We started with like 3 models, like Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI, when at the very start. And then the llamas came along, and then there was a massive explosion, and now the world is with, there's a million llamas and Mistrals on DeepSeeks and so on, and each one has their own specialty around prompting. You can teach that.
Yes.
You can teach some principles, But overall, you cannot teach it in the way companies would like that. Companies want to send someone to a skills future course where they learn the magic prompt recipes. Good luck. In 2 months, whatever we teach you today is actually harmful. The newer reasoning models, if you try to prompt them the way we taught you a year ago, will actually perform worse. Right? So there's no answer here because our academic system, our upskilling system right now struggles mightily with trying to teach you facts. And facts change very, very rapidly in this world.
I see that actually. And I see this as quite an issue as well with the, I'm so prompted to ask you, like, what would the solution be? But is it then, let me just give a guess, is it to make your own apps then? Make your own agents? I mean, is this the
all of it is changing, right? Even if I teach you today how to make an agent, it's going to be just twice as easy in 2 months. So the first question is it the right time? Do the right thing at the right time. Generally, the longer you wait, the more you're going to save.
Yes.
Right? Especially when you're thinking about training. And I have a somewhat provocative take on the whole AI thing, which is chatbots don't work. We realized this a while ago, but we saw this in several fields in Singapore as well. Everyone wanted to adopt. Right? We talked about that adoption is the first reflex because that worked very well for the last decade. So everyone adopts. What do you adopt? You need a product to adopt. What is available? Only chatbots.
Yes.
Right? And on the surface of it, that sounds very nice, right? They're deceptively simple and everyone can chat. What could go wrong? Right? But when you actually look at it, you realize chatbots are terrible.
Why?
And they're not going to work ever.
Why is that?
Well, so for one, if I give you a traditional user interface like Word or Photoshop or something complex, can it do something it cannot do?
No.
Yeah. And so if I give you a chatbot and you ask it, here, do this math, what happens?
Well, you've got to put in give it instructions.
Yeah, but LLMs are terrible at math, very terrible. Oh, they make mistakes. Yes, they can't do math. The LLM itself cannot do math. But there's nuance there. If you pick the right model in OpenAI, the LLM might recognize that you're trying to do math, understand that it doesn't do math very well, will write code, run the code, and give you the answer. But that won't work if you're on the free version, and it won't work if you're on the wrong model. In that chatbot, that drop down with the weird model names like GPT-4, O, Mini, O3 High, what the fuck does any of that mean?
No
idea. So how do you train this to people? It changes every week, right? So yes, some models can do math by writing code if you're on the paid version. But many of them can't. And in general, LLMs cannot do math, but the interface is maximally permissive. It allows you to ask it to do things it doesn't do. We also know there are hallucinations, for example.
Yes.
And they're more prevalent when some data is not in the training data. So one thing that a lot of people, including executives, do is they ask AI about AI. There's the great, well-documented case of one of British minister, who after a freedom of information request that comes out, he's been regularly conferring with ChatGPT about how to apply AI to the public sector. But that doesn't work because AI is trained with a training cutoff.
Yes.
So the data actually, when you take a model like GPT 4.5, which is the latest from OpenAI, the training cutoff is in 2023. There's 2 years of exponential progress missing. So you cannot ask these questions.
Yes.
You cannot ask AI about AI, but the interface allows you to do it. Right? So we have a maximally permissive interface that allows you to do things you cannot do. A normal user interface, you cannot do that. But we're not done yet. So you have also, when you press a button in Photoshop or when you press a button in Word, it does the same thing every time. And it has a little tooltip and it's easy to teach.
Yes.
Here, you do the same prompt. Sometimes you get a different result.
You get everything. You get an impression of what it thinks that you're looking for, right?
And when you do a systematic evaluation, of which people do a lot, you find that it's actually 20-30% wrong. That's not a small number.
Yes.
Right? So you have that. And then, take healthcare here in Singapore. Where do people in healthcare come from? Many of our healthcare workers come from the Philippines, they come from Indonesia, they come from countries that are not native English. Even we are not really native English.
Correct.
Wait. So now you have a software that is highly sensitive to language. Right? So the button you press is sensitive to how well you express yourself in English. That wasn't on the job description. It's not what we hired for. Right? So when you take all of this, you now have software that allows you to do things it cannot do. You have software that doesn't behave deterministically. So the button does different things. Even if you pass the prompt along, it doesn't do the same thing. So you need to have judgment afterwards to figure out, does something work or does it not work? And you have software that is very sensitive to language.
Yes.
And when you take these things together, along with a whole bunch of other problems that I won't go into, you're now in a place, biases and all of that stuff, right? You're now in a place where, how do you train a large organization on that? And the ground rules are changing every 6 months of what the technology can do, how to prompt it. It's untrainable. So chatbots are, in fact, a dead end. They're a bad idea, they're terrible, and they're a dead end. Why do we do them? Very simple. Because if I'm a large tech company that needs to primarily raise money from investors and doesn't want to invest in product, because we all know that product investments are a bad idea right now, you create the minimally viable interface. So the chatbot works really well for OpenAI. It works really well for other companies that don't want to invest in product, but it doesn't work for end users. And we've thrown endless amount of money in the last 2 years into chatbot adoption. Companies come to us and ask, hey, can we train? And we generally say, no, don't do that. It's not a good idea. There are some job profiles that can work well with chatbots. Software engineers can work well with chatbots, primarily because their job is frontier technology, rapidly changing, problem solving. A lot of what they do over and over for a job matches fairly well, and doesn't really matter if it's a chatbot or another person you work with, right? But if you try to move this at scale into a company that has lots of subspecializations, HR and so on, it doesn't work. And then there's the devil in the details of the software, like biases. You cannot take a PDF, throw it into OpenAI and say, is this a good candidate for a job? You cannot. What does good mean? Okay, you make a bigger prompt. You say, all great. But the biases, there are papers that show the biases are encoded in more than just names or language. Like if you take papers from students with a different ethnicity, and you put them into an LLM, the LLM will apply biases based on the ethnicity, because it turns out that the frequency of vocabulary is different between where people grew up. So the LLM will still detect and then apply its biases. All right, and now, to make this really bad, now think about what's happening in the United States. We are scrubbing the internet of all achievement of women and of people of color, for example, right? The Arlington Cemetery, National Cemetery, removes Colin Powell, removes, black and female leaders from it. The NSA, the NASA, they're all removing the pages for women. So in 2 years, you have a model trained on the data from the internet, and you say, hey, I have this job, who should get it? Like the model will go with a white male, of course, because no one else has ever achieved anything. Right? So it's a fun problem, right?
It's a fun experiment, yes, but that was another thing that I was just fuming when I heard about that. It's like, who is behind taking those names off, and why are they doing it? It's like, it's almost as if it was a political chess move or something, and I still don't understand that. But of course, coming back to this whole idea about this frontier technology, and I'm thinking about it, companies are investing so much money into it, but you're telling me that products are not what you want to invest in, because that's just being, updated every month, every week nowadays.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So we're investing more money than ever in the history of mankind, private money, into a single technology, right? Meta invested a year ago, $35 billion. That's inflation adjusted, the Manhattan Project. The United States government effort to end World War II and build the nuclear bomb. has been invested. And that's private money, right? This year, it's going to be $65 billion, right? 2 Manhattan projects, a single company, and then they're giving it away, quote unquote, for free. Okay, so there's a problem here already because you don't invest that money without having some kind of ROI expectations, right?
That's true.
So there's one.
So expectation for return of investment.
Of course, that's what investment means.
But at the same time, you just told me that it's a bad product to invest in.
It's bad to build products. But what if you don't make the product? What if you are raising funds to raise funds?
Okay.
What if the stock is the product? Right? So when you look at OpenAI, I think this is really the most visible. OpenAI created one product, ChatGPT, and since then is running every 6 months fundraising and announces new products. DALL-E, right? Image generation, for example, GPT platform, the voice models, and so on. When you look at these products, you realize they get announced, they get launched, and they never get improved. DALL-E is but now about the worst image generation out there, right? There's no improvement. You have no control, no editing, nothing serious, really. GPT platform is rotting away, still unusable. Announced, but basically left to die. The audio API is announced, the whole Charlotte Johansson thing, announced at a price point that makes absolutely no sense. I think it was $15 per hour of audio. Like when you look at what Duolingo charges $15 for a month with audio, just not real time, there's no market for that. So why do that? And the products are basically not improved. They're just sitting there. They just come out for fundraising cycles. So the question becomes, maybe these companies are just releasing minimal products to raise the next round of funds. Now, the question is, of course, how does this end? Because eventually that sounds like a pyramid scheme, right? But what, just hypothetically, what if you bought a government with that? What if the government then would use taxpayer money to do things like government GPT and run every office worker's weekly summary needlessly through AI and pay you back, right? It's a question you can ask yourself. And the other side of that is if you're a normal company, right?
Yes.
When you look at the math does not work out. When you spend $400 million to train a model, that is on top of the charts for 1 week after Claude 3.7 comes out and knocks it off, that was Grok, there's no ROI. Zero ROI. So so you have to assume there's a different game being played because it's not a traditional game that makes any sense there's no 4-dimensional chess here. It's just a different game.
It's tech.
Right? And so if you are a company, you cannot compete with that.
No.
Right? So when we draw back one step, what do we know? We know that American companies have a massive benefit in fundraising. Right? That is the special
sauce.
What the Chinese did is launch a highly efficient model.
Yeah, and it's much cheaper.
That took a lot of the value of that fundraising and basically reduced it to 5%.
Yeah.
Right? You could see that the week before DeepSeek, Sam Altman ran around, had Donald Trump dance on his $500 billion Stargate party. The numbers didn't change one bit after DeepSeek. Right? Oh, we still need 500 billion. Well, theoretically, you need 5% of it for the same effect.
Yes.
The numbers didn't change. Why?
They're just ignoring the game.
Yeah, I don't think it's the same game, basically, right? And so we have a great graph, right?
Yeah.
Just to show what's actually happening here, right? I think we're all being taken for a ride. It's not that the technology isn't impactful; it's very impactful. But so something happened, I think, 2 years ago. Shake.com, Shake's books, Shake.com.
Okay.
Tech books, learning. E-learning, especially in Asia, lots of parents investing into their children. The CEO gets asked, so this ChatGPT thing, is it dangerous for your business? Aren't, chatbots going to take that value away? And the CEO said something to the point of, no, not yet. We don't see it. And everyone sold him off. 50%, 60% drop, I think. Today, they're basically dead. So what does that mean? Because when you go to today, how many chatbots are deployed in schools and in learning? Turns out not that many. We talked about it, chatbots are terrible, but there's a critical question here, which is no one wants to roll out a chatbot to children which allows them to engage in suicide ideation, for example.
Wait a minute. Wait, suicide ideation? I was just about to say that even though the schools are not implementing it, the students would actually be using it for their research and their homework.
Yeah,
what is this?
What you're talking about, like tutoring and so on. What do I mean with suicide ideation is one of the unsolved problems of chatbots is that we cannot align them very well.
Okay.
So the more generalist a chatbot is, the more capability it has, the harder it is to basically make sure it's secure. And you might have noticed that in the US right now, the whole push is let's just forget about alignment and safety altogether. What that means is if you're, there was like 1 or 2 publicized cases. I think the case of the man who was planning to kill the queen because a chatbot encouraged him to. Chatbots tell us what we like to hear, right? They're fundamentally built to create the most likely response. And there's a process we call alignment where we try to make these chatbots more aligned with how humans would work. For example, we will show them lots and lots of examples of rejecting to make a bomb to make them less likely to reject the bomb. Now, it turns out you cannot less likely to make a bomb, right? And it turns out you can't actually do that 100%. It's not 100% reliable. These things are always breakable. Right? There's no chatbot currently out there that isn't at some level breakable with that. And the problem is, of course, everyone's nightmare is a child, for example, engaging in suicide ideation if they are if they are engaging with a chatbot. So schools and learning organizations actually haven't rolled out many of them.
And it would amplify the thought process and actually explain to you how you could actually do it.
There's plenty of examples of that. So,
oh my God.
So the problem. So, what I meant to say is, we are now 2 years in, and there are no chatbots.
Yes.
Not a lot for schools, right? Because of these problems, right? Also, hallucinations. You'd want to teach the children the right things, not things that are made up.
Yes. Don't
know. Objectively, the CEO of check.com was right, but the shareholders sold him off. So what happened? To go back to our graph, we're now at a point where if you run a publicly company, you cannot say AI is not an immediate threat. They want an AI story. They want to hear what your strategy is of how you're going to benefit from AI. It's a really tough story to tell, actually, in many ways, especially when you don't really understand the technology yet. But we're at a point, we have this great, amazing graph from Tech in Asia for last year, which shows 6-month funding changes. And on that graph, we have artificial intelligence have a 360% growth. And basically every other area, biotech, health, logistics, clean tech, e-commerce, a drop.
Is a not.
Now, we actually, of course, still invest in healthcare, for example.
But they have to then prove that they are actually going to be trying a way or two in implementing it together with AI.
Correct. The only thing we're funding right now, and with massive funds, is anything with AI. So you have a hammer, and everyone is now running around in their company, hammering every surface with that hammer, often without understanding what that hammer does. And that's no good. That's bubble behavior, in fact. Right? Classic bubble behavior. And you might remember the same happening with blockchain. All right, put it on the blockchain, everything on the blockchain. It didn't work out so well. It will be very similar with AI because what we're seeing right now isn't ready in most cases.
I think it's really scary, the use case for, say, the next funding round. However, the leaders themselves and staff don't really know what they can do with the AI. Where does that lead?
Well, let's break it down, right? Let's break this down because it's actually not a very hard problem. The market says investors say, if you do not have a compelling AI story to tell, you don't get any money.
Yes,
that filters anything. That filters from the start anything. So you have to talk about AI. Now you need to be able to actually understand AI. You need to have the talent to execute what you're saying. When you go to, let's say, Enterprise SG and you say, I want to do this AI thing, they'll ask you, so do you have the people? So if you don't, it's game over as well.
So you have to train your people.
Right. To train your people, you need to have the ability to operate at the speed of AI. Because as we discussed, it is moving
too fast,
very rapidly.
Yes.
Right.
And the certificate that you sent them for 6 months ago is going to be outdated by now.
Yeah, and there's no certificates, there's no courses. Whatever we teach in universities right now is fundamentals that will be useful for some people, right? But not the kind of thing that companies need to execute right now, right? And so you have this massively accelerated thing that at the same time is mandatory. If you want to get any funding, if you're publicly listed, it's mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
And that threatens your industries. Now we're getting into the job aspect and into the disruptive potential because this technology also happens to be quite real.
Yes.
Right. So if the way I would describe it is we have the chatbots and they don't work. So let's move them aside. We want to adopt AI, but the chatbots don't work. What do we need?
Yeah. We need, we need the developers to come back to try to then create an app that would be task specific to the companies.
We need a product. Right?
You still need
we need a product because if the chatbot isn't the product,
yes,
then we need a product, and ideally it has a real user interface, not a chatbot, for most cases, right? So let's start with that. Okay. Now there's an interesting thing happening, right? You might have noticed code generation has taken really off.
Yes.
Right? Everyone is talking about write coding. Everyone is talking about writing software with AI. It's real. Why? Very, very simple. Like my profession, software engineering, we made terrible mistake. We uploaded everything about our profession from the start to 2 websites, GitHub and Stack Overflow.
Okay.
And it's in the training data.
That's true, yeah.
Right? And the only things we really understand about this technology, it's not super sentient. It is actually, it really can mostly reproduce and recombine what is it in its training data. And there's no better training data than software engineering because we put our entire profession from the start up there. We discussed every single problem we have publicly on forums like Stack Overflow and Quora. All right. Our religious debates, monolith versus microservice, all these kind of things, they're all there in great detail.
So it's well documented.
It's extremely well documented. And as a result, code generation is a phenomenally powerful technology. It has much fewer hallucinations than other applications like medical and so on. It's also not that critical.
Yeah.
Because code you can test, you can run it.
Yeah.
And a programming language has like 20 words compared to, LLMs eat English for breakfast with its thousands of words and double and triple meaning and context sensitivity. Programming languages are super simple and then you can run them.
And it works or it doesn't work.
Correct. So. And so we end up with code generation working. So what does that mean? Just because it's a really, really great example for showing how massively disruptive this technology is about to be. What does it mean? It means we can write software code much, much faster than we used to. Right? A software engineer can instruct a code model to write a well-scoped problem, code for a well-scoped problem, and it takes half a minute and the code is there.
Yes.
So the economics underlying all software engineering is software engineers are very expensive. They spend a lot of time coding, and therefore we need to build a whole bunch of processes to protect the software engineers from doing unnecessary work because they're very expensive. Okay?
Okay.
Production. Software production. We have product owners talking to designers who mock up interfaces, who write user stories, who build this long chain of process. Tasks go into software like Jira or ExtraView and or GitHub issues, right? Like massive processes that exist primarily to protect the time of these very expensive people, right? But it turns out now writing code, which is a large time-consuming part
of
software engineers, not the entire job. In fact, software engineers do plenty of other things, much of it very quickly, like architecture, because they have the experience. But writing code is now dropping to a much, much smaller. So what does that mean?
It means that now the experience outtrumps that code writing process.
Correct. So here's the thing, right? You want people who are experienced because they will be able to instruct these models much better.
Correct.
But it means a few other things too. It means that your code generation processes are much faster. So you can iterate much faster.
Yes.
Right, on everything, and your software gets delivered faster.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for the economics of software? First, there will be more.
Yes.
Right?
And it will be cheaper.
Well, potentially. It will be cheaper to produce, okay? For sure. So now we can look at what has generative AI done to a bunch of other industries. I work with some people in the publishing industry.
Oh my.
So I can tell you that when ChatGPT came out, within a month, the number of books sent to Amazon went up like 100x, must be 1,000x by now. Right?
Yes.
You don't notice that because Amazon is one of those companies that has solved infinite supply. We talked about the deep learning, right? But what decides what you see when you look for a book on Amazon?
Yeah. The app, the software behind it.
Well, the deep learning algorithms, right? The ranking algorithms, and they look at two things primarily, which is likes, which you can buy, right? And did you pay an ad? Because the entire front page these days is ads and all the services, right?
They wouldn't be doing it in alignment with my interests. They're doing it with...
Yeah, of course not.
No, come on.
Of course not.
They wouldn't do that. They just want to have more money.
So here's what happens. Real world example. You write for 2 years on the capstone book. You're an academic. You write the capstone book for your career.
Yeah.
And you publish it on Amazon. And a day later, someone publishes a book on the same subject, but not a single word is the same. Right? Our buddy GPT-4 wrote it.
Just
right.
changed.
But that company did not spend 2 years of savings and so on writing that book. No. They spend a few months of money on buying fake likes and ads. Which book gets sold?
Mm-hmm. More than mine.
Correct. So moving back to software. What happens when more software gets created? The app store surfaces explode. The companies running the app stores become more powerful. Because the more people are competing for selling the same thing, right, the more power goes to the platform company to decide. And that usually comes down to money, which is, by the way, why our friends at Meta are giving away AI for free. Because it will make everyone make more content and they will make that money back on the auction, on the ad auction eventually. But it gets more fun. Then you can make software very quickly. The fundamental question of buy versus build, which is underlying all acquisition in companies, changes, right? When you, up till, let's say last year, when you build software, you have to build software for problems that are large enough to have a large audience, right? You need to solve a problem many people have. And you can then add more and more features, so you add more and more people. Right? But what if it is now very cheap to make just the software that you need for your problem? Before that, we would never think about it because software engineers are so expensive, time-wise, that we wouldn't make a software for a problem that we only have once or that only our company has. We would buy something bigger and then we would try to customize it.
And adapt to that.
So at the medical company that I work at, Novi, for example, very simple example, just timesheets for contractors. Now there's dozens of software, open source and so on for it, but it turns out they are all overloaded with features. Sure. What if you have very simple needs, enough needs that you can express them in a few sentences? Well, it turns out you can just create the software in minutes for that and deploy it specifically for your business. So here's something that is changing the fundamental economics of software. It tells us that if you work in building standard software, you are going to have a bad time now because companies now will have the choice to use their internal software engineers to build much quicker software. Furthermore, and this is why I, by the way, disagree with the idea that software engineers will be out of a job.
No, I don't.
I think we will need a lot more of them very quickly because we can now build software in many cases that was just not economic before, right? So I actually happen to agree with the CEO of Anthropic, who's saying by the end of the year, 90% of code is going to be written by AI. But not for the reason most people think when they look at that sentence. Most people think, oh, the AI will eat 90% of the work of the software engineers. That's not at all what is happening. What is happening is that people who use AI for coding, and I've been doing this now for like 7-8 months, are writing 1,000% more code, right? Like my code output is massively higher. I built code for things that I would never have considered. We were sitting there designing that software engineering bootcamp that you saw. And, you have here's all the lessons and the teachers, and we need to now figure out on which day do we do what, right? So what do? You could bring up Outlook and try to make things in there. No, you take the entire file and you throw it in and say, make me an interface where I can move around the lessons 5 hours a day, where I can start on April the 26th, pull the public holiday from data.gov.sg. And 10 minutes later, you have an interface for your one problem, and then you throw it away. There's no maintenance because you throw it away when you're done. So that is software I would have never written before.
Yes.
That is incremental to the job of the software engineer.
Yes.
And there's going to be a lot of it. We are going to drown in work. When you move upstream from the software engineer, there's another change. So at Novi, we now have doctors sitting for an hour with a designer and an engineer using a code generation software to build the interfaces that they are going to use.
Yeah.
All right.
This is all really, showing us that this is all on the up and up, right? I mean, this is not the scary outlook that was painted for us not too long ago, because this all of a sudden gives us the opportunity to then create more advanced, more efficient, bespoke apps that would be totally aligned to our needs.
So we're a bit in the phase where software engineers are now the ones, but it cannot draw hands, right?
Oh.
It cannot do our job. We're too important. That's not what's going to happen. So for example, when you look at this production process now, you have a doctor spending 2 hours with a designer and a software engineer, basically prompting an interface into existence. That interface is not the final interface, but it's a functional prototype.
Correct.
That they can test drive. They can discover all the things that otherwise they would have discovered months later when you went through design, Figma, implementation, prototype. You can do that now in an hour. And what you have at the end is a highly functional prototype that you can give engineering, and we throw it away. I mean, we're going to rewrite it because, it has to be safe, it has to be well done. But that prototype has a lot more experience in it. The doctor, in the end, has 30 years of experience, right? So in the old world, the world that I was brought up as a software engineer, we actually did a terrible job. We were told when we were trained that never let people tell you what to do. Let them tell you their problem, and you are the only one who can solve it because you know how computers work. And that's terrible objectively, because what that means is a tech pro gives you 2 hours of their valuable time, discards most of the valuable context that you have, because in 2 hours you cannot get it across, then builds a product, right? Here, let's say here in public healthcare, Synapse would build the product, right? The government company that supports healthcare. Then after a few weeks or a month, you get your product back and it's not great. And then you get quoted $30,000 to change it, which that doesn't happen. And so we all end up with software that is objectively terrible because we have cut the people who actually use the software out. Now, code generation enables the people who use the software to build prototypes and functional interfaces with all their experience and then transmit that to us. There's a bit of loft of power for software engineers, boohoo, right? We no longer get to control everything there, but we can re-implement that with our, newfound speed. When we use AI coding tools, we can implement what they give us, and we can now cut software engineering product cycles from months to weeks and from weeks to days.
Which is important because of the speed of AI, getting ahead of us at this point in time. It's better to do it faster anyway.
Well, I don't know where that speed thing will go, right? That's the pattern that everything is speeding up constantly. But what we can tell is the narrative that software engineers are going to be out of a job is a very typical mistake we always make with technology.
Yeah, I understand that.
Which is, this is the first order effect you look at is software engineers are out of a job. That's not what's going to happen at all.
I don't see that as what's going to happen as well. But, but I'm also looking at it from the media direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same narrative that's going around. But I'd like to find out also about this thing that you brought up earlier on. You said vibe coding. Would that be then the next thing of, for non-software engineers?
I think so. I think we're all going to create software now. The mistake is to think that necessarily is production software. Right? To run at-scale production software requires different skill sets. It requires access to data that is often privileged, important, regulation, and so on. And software engineers are going to be pretty protected in that space, just in the way lawyers are protected by the fact that AI is not going to get to testify in court, right?
Yeah.
Or make contracts at this point, and hopefully not anytime soon.
But could you explain to us about vibe coding then?
I think former OpenAI person termed that it's just the idea to just sit there and prompt, not think about the code, but just create code prompting these code generation models. And there are many tools out there. And in recent times, we've moved to teaching people how to use these tools in our courses because it gives you a new skill. There's some great examples. So there's a healthcare innovator, for example, from Woodlands Health, who is now making 2, 3, 4 apps a week to solve specific problems without a software engineering background, a bit of like, I think a boot camp at some point or something like that. So there's a bit of tech knowledge, but that's helping to express.
Yes.
Right. And, to take the bigger picture here, when we look at ideas, you have an idea.
Yeah.
Right. An idea can take many different manifestations. A story.
Yes.
A short movie, music, a 3D world, an image. And certain transitions to take an idea and manifest it over is very expensive.
Correct.
Right? You would have to pay someone. For example, you have an image of your apartment and you would like that 3D modeled. You would have to pay someone with a specialized skill to do 3D modeling. Well, it turns out that transformers learn these skills very easily, right? At least to the average. And so now everyone objectively has the ability, if they have access to the right model, to take a picture and turn it into a 3D model. Right? That is, very rapidly progressing. We already had the idea of taking a text and turning it into an image. There are some models that we played around with in our bootcamp that take a video and add the audio for it, and so on. So the disruptive impact of this technology is that the subject matter expertise of people who are sitting on specialized jobs controlling that movement is being replaced with machines.
Yes.
Right? That has dramatic societal implications, knowledge work implications, right, on one side. But it also means that a lot more people get access to this. So take 3D modeling. It is conceivable that people who are good at 3D model today will actually have more work because many more companies have now the basic ability to create 3D assets, but not necessarily the ability to final them. It's likely that AI will create a lot more production and a lot of jobs will basically shift to work with AI-generated things and work on top of that. When you realize that you can now do 10x the AI for 1x the cost, you get more AI out of it in the end. I find it deeply insulting. When I get an AI phone call, I find it deeply insulting.
Yeah.
That's not what I want.